In this video, I'm going to show you how to install Python and the ChipWhisperer system. So, if you need the main documentation, it's accessible from chipwhisperer.com, and then you can see the full Python documentation. It's also normally included in a ChipWhisperer release. So if I download one of the releases, so I'm going to get the latest version, 0.07, as part of this video, it'll be included in that. So let me go back to the online one for now. And this documentation takes you through the setup procedure. So it's different for Linux than it is for Windows. I'll show you the Windows one. So the easiest thing to do is to install Python distribution if you don't already have Python. I'm going to use WinPython as one of these distributions, and we want the 2.7.6. You can't use Python 3 or 3.3 in this case. It has to be 2.7 point something. And we want the 32-bit version of it, at least for this tutorial. You can in fact use the 64-bit version, and depending on what you're doing, you may prefer having the 64-bit version, as you might be working with large data sets. I'm going to use the 32-bit version for this tutorial. So WinPython 2.7, the latest, whatever, 2.7.6.4, and 32-bit. So we'll download that and then install it. And in the meantime, actually Chrome for some reason has blocked this download, so we'll use Internet Explorer. So again, we go to chipwhisperer.com. Get the files. And this ChipWhisperer 0.07, which you could have also gone through to from that release page I showed you before. So we'll just save that somewhere. So we have these two files downloading, and I will pause the video until they're both done. So once we've downloaded, so both the files are downloaded, so I have the actual ChipWhisperer release and the here and WinPython. So first I'm going to install WinPython, and we'll go ahead with that. So this will basically give us a Python environment that from within we can run ChipWhisperer. So I'm sort of skipping through some of the stuff here. So when you choose where to install it, it defaults to just, whatever the folder was. And make it somewhere more useful. Like here, I'm going to install it to the rootsy directory. It doesn't really matter actually, though. You could install it to your My Documents or whatever you want. And again, we'll just wait for that to install. So now that Python has finished installing, I can continue with the setup. So now we can navigate to wherever installed. So it doesn't put any icons or anything like that by default, and I'll delete the installer in this case. So the one thing we might want to do is we can open the control panel. And this actually isn't required. For example, if you already have a different version of Python installed, or you're not able to do this, you don't have to do this step, but you can register the distribution. And this basically allows you to simply double click on a .py file, and it'll, I think, put some stuff in the start menu. Yeah, start menu. So it makes life a little easier. So we do this, request permission, and now we should have some various Python stuff, WinPython. So we have all sorts of Python programs, including stuff like Spider, which is a nice little GUI for experimenting with Python. So, oops, ignore that running. Alright, so now we have Python. We need to do some additional setup. So I'm first going to this is the latest ChipWhisperer release, and I'm just going to copy it anywhere. I'm copying this to the root C directory. Again, you don't have to do it there. You could put it in whatever directory you want. Or you can also clone this stuff from Git, which is not shown in this video. So we'll just wait for that to copy. because I'll now use the documentation that comes with ChipWhisperer to complete the rest, which is the same as the online documentation. Alright, so here we've extracted the ChipWhisperer stuff, and as I said, once you open the ChipWhisperer folder, it has a link to the documentation, which is the same as online. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm actually going to rename this from 0.07 to just ChipWhisperer. So before we can continue, there's a few more things we have to install to set up Python. It's described here. So it talks about Git if you want to do it, but we have some additional requirements to install. So what we're going to use is this guide here. So again, this is using the WinPython. So we have to install these additional programs. So how we do this is we have to go back to where WinPython was installed and open a WinPython command prompt. So this says Python in the path, and go pip install pyqtgraph. So these are some additional packages, and it'll download and install that, and we'll do the same thing for this other package. Pip install config.obj. And then finally we have to install PyUSB. So PyUSB is used for the ChipWhisperer capture hardware. And you may get this error here that says could not find a version that satisfies. So you have to explicitly tell it what version to use, and I use this equals equals notation, 1.00b1, I believe. And you can just sort of look at the various options here. So there we go, that works. So now it's successfully installed. All right. So finally, we will run the ChipWhisperer capture and see if it works. So I go to, there's two ways to do this, and I'll show you both. If you've registered the Python distribution, you can simply double click on this ChipWhisperer capture.py and it should run. If you haven't done that, what you'll have to do is cd to the directory where it's located. So in this directory I have ChipWhisperer capture, and run python ChipWhisperer capture.py. And you can see it gave us some errors, so there's one step missing. Before you can actually run it, what you have to do is register ChipWhisperer with the Python distribution. So we use two commands to do this. So we have to run this setup.py script in two different directories, so they're given here. Oops. So the first one is, you can see ChipWhisperer OpenADC control SW Python, and inside this we have this setup.py, so you have to run Python setup.py develop, and you should see finish processing dependencies. And we need to do the same thing in another directory given here, ChipWhisperer, I believe, software, and again there should be a setup.py script, and we run the same command, Python setup.py develop. Alright, so now we can try running ChipWhisperer capture. And again, here I'm running it from the command line, which will always work, so it opened okay. If I've registered the distribution, I can just double click on this file, and the same thing should happen. Alright, so that works. And finally, just delete that. What I can do is I can just make a shortcut to the program so that I don't have to go finding it every time. So I'm going to make a shortcut to ChipWhisperer capture and the analyzer. Same thing for capture. Alright, so this is what the capture window looks like. It initially looks a little crazy. You actually need to close some things, so we can close this project text editor. You don't normally use it, and you can overlap these three windows if you want. It depends a bit on your screen resolution, but you can just move stuff around like that. So the only other thing we might want to do now is actually connect, if we have a physical ChipWhisperer capture device, at this point we could connect that physical ChipWhisperer capture. Now you may notice, for example, when I select scope here, I only have the option of ChipWhisperer/OpenADC. The ChipWhisperer system supports other scopes like picoscope. It can support Visa scopes, and I don't have any of the Sasibo boards or the Secure boards. And why this is because I'm missing various Python modules. So some of them get printed on startup just saying that there's an error. Normally they won't though, long term. So where you can figure out what you're possibly missing is under help list enabled disabled modules. And it tries to tell you if it knows what's missing and why it's not working. So for example, we can see that the picoscope is not enabled because you don't have the picoscope module. And the same thing's happening for some other targets, Security and Sasibo. We need this other FTDI driver. So these are all documented online. I won't go through all the details of that. But I will show you how to and you can see the same thing if we open the analyzer. So let's close that. Open ChipWhisperer Analyzer. And we may see various warnings. So one of them that you'll see right now, the certain features won't work with an older version of SciPy. This is mostly for the profiling attacks, so you'll have to manually install a more recent version. And again, when you open the analyzer, it defaults, so it will tries to remember your window positions as much as possible, but the first time it has no information at all, so it just defaults to sort of some crazy setup. So try to drop these on. So maximize that. There we go. Oh, we'll just close it. There we go. So I don't know if you keep the console separately, whatever. And again, you can see if there's any disabled modules. The analyzer has less dependencies, so it's just missing one of the MySQL file traces, so you need to install some SQL driver. Everything else is more or less there. And again, you could move stuff around because it sort of defaults to putting all these windows open. And the waveform display is often the most useful. Alright, so that's how we install Python and install the ChipWhisperer stuff on Windows computers. So you can check out the other video that shows you how to configure the ChipWhisperer hardware once we've installed all of this ChipWhisperer software.